Namaste and hello to everybody. This is Nayaswami Jaya and I'm broadcasting this from my flat in Pune. And I think this is day 4 of our social distancing experiment that we're going to be going for 21 days. And Nayaswami or Brahmachari Aditya also has been broadcasting. And after this program is over, we will have Brahmacharini Blezi leading us after a very short break, leading us in healing prayers. This evening, we're going to talk about the subject, picking up where we left off, addressing how to improve our magnetism and our by the use of our will, by the use of our right attitude, and many other tools in order that our magnetism can be strong to be able to face the challenges that are presenting to us now with the infections that are happening around the world. Before we begin, though, I'd like to begin with a short prayer, and then I'll answer some questions that have come in from our last broadcast. So please pray with me. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of Kriya Yoga, all saints and sages, we humbly bow to you all. Guide our lives with thy presence, and may we feel thy strength within us, facing all challenges, knowing that thy presence, thy joy, thy love is within, helping us in all circumstances. Om Shanti Shanti. I'll begin first with the questions and then proceed to what we're going to talk about today, topic of selflessness and selfishness. And the first question, I have 2 that I'd like to share. And if you remember last week we were speaking, one of the topics was speaking about the breath. And one of the viewers asked, which pranayama is best for those over 70? Now, I didn't specify any specific pranayama other than the most general and I think the most useful, particularly in the circumstances that we're facing right now. Is my intention with that class last time was to encourage everybody, and particularly those of you who are in elder years, to improve your breath capacity, because the coronavirus that is spreading particularly manifests as a shortness of breath. And for those people who succumb to it, it's usually through pneumonia and the inability to get enough oxygen into the lungs. And so as we age, we lose breath capacity. It's part of functioning of aging, but it doesn't have to be if we keep ourselves in good condition. But generally, as we age, that statistically, that tendency is there for us to lose that breath capacity. And so I was suggesting that what we do is practice daily breathing exercises, whether walking, going out for walks, or special time during the day. And use the most general one. Don't be thinking of all the myriads of different pranayamas. Just use the most general one, which would be even count breathing. Inhaling to a count, let's say 10, 10 or 12, 8 if you can only do 8, and then holding the breath and then exhaling 8. Now, I suggested, though, that as you're doing that we pay attention, and I made the point of breathing from the diaphragm, but especially what some people don't do is especially when you fill the diaphragm and the lungs or the rib cage expands to the side, fill the upper chest with, and this takes a little bit of pressure, upward pressure, fill the upper chest with air and oxygen, and uplift the chest and pull it up and feel it, a little bit of pressure there. And then you can, as you're drawing this air up, you can even feel the life force rising in the spine, and then as if you're even pushing it up into the upper cavities, and then even taking it up to the spiritual eye. But you want to fill that upper chest, because many people, even though they breathe diaphragmatically, they forget the upper chest, and this begins to close down. And this is typically what happens in old age, as people begin to lose the breath capacity, particularly up here. In weeks ahead, and maybe next week even, Brahmachari Aditya is going to go into this a little bit more from the medical side. So I don't want to take that side of it because it's a long, big topic, and he, being a doctor, is more appropriate one to speak to that topic. But just use it in terms of the even count breathing, but paying very attention and filling that upper part of that chest. And in this way, you'll exercise it. So I'm speaking here more from physical realities more than the spiritual side. But as you know, those of you particularly who are practitioners of yoga or Kriya Yoga, so especially, there's a spiritual side to this as well. But I'm going to leave that to Dr. Ditya to follow up on next week. The second question was, does diet, good question, does diet play a role in improving our breathing? What facilitates deep breathing? And now this was from a diet perspective. Well, there's a lot of correlation between good diet and the ability and breathing. Yes, there is. And again, I'm just going to list some things here, and I'm going to let Dityaji expand upon it in his discourse next week. Obviously, if you're healthy, you're going to breathe more deeply. So by being able to maintain your health in good quality health, naturally, you're going to start breathing. It's been shown that actually that fasting, this relates to diet, fasting actually helps breath capacity and the ability to open up the lungs. And so if you practice fasting from time to time, perhaps once a week, perhaps a light fast, or even a complete fast, see if that might help. Now, this one might be a little controversial with some people, but coffee actually releases, or tea releases the airways. It's a relaxant that perhaps at the caffeine in there, it relaxes the airways in the lungs. Magnesium relaxes the airways. So those sorts of foods that would have that, and you can go into that a little bit. Nuts have an effect upon breath and the lungs. And just generally, the principle here is the less carbon producing foods in the body, the easier it is for the body to expel the carbon dioxide. So consequently, this is a basic principle of Kriya Yoga, of relaxing the body, is to decarbonize the body. And you'll find that, for example, a sattvic diet, fruits and vegetables and fresh vegetables, as opposed to a lot of heavy carbohydrates and especially meat, which those latter ones produce a great deal of carbon in the body and in the bloodstream. And the heart and the lungs need to work a lot more to be able to get rid of that and out of the body. So a sattvic diet, vegetarian diet, is recommended. You'll find that correlation taking very beneficial for you. Now, again, I'm going to leave this till next week, and Aditya will pick that up. But if you do have any further questions on that, or on anything that we speak about tonight, or any of these talks, please do write them in either on the chat function on this program, or you can use online at anandaindiaonline.org, and we'll get that email and address these questions one by one. Now, this week, I want to introduce a topic, and I want to introduce it through the medium of this title of selflessness versus selfishness. The obvious difference between those two, the one drawing energy to ourselves and the other one pushing it out, and why this is more magnetic. But there's also, as you'll see as I'm going into this topic, there's a deeper side to this as well. It's going to be a little bit interesting that we're going to have to pursue as the weeks go on a little bit more. Now, I'll start with a story. In the 1960s, there was a scientist, I don't remember his name, but he came up with a proposition, and he presented this proposition, I believe it was at a conference, and that he was saying that the smallest change in a function in the world around us can have great effects. And it came to be known as the butterfly principle. You may have heard of this. And it's been summarized. I don't think he necessarily said it this way, but it's summarized with the principle, the saying that A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and it results in a hurricane in Texas, or perhaps, let's say, a cyclone off the west coast of India. And of course, when he presented this and his thesis at that time in the 1960s, it was somewhat ridiculed. It wasn't accepted. They thought he was absurd. Some small thing like a butterfly flapping its wings would have some relationship to something much larger, like a hurricane or a cyclone. But as the years passed, and by the 1980s, the development of supercomputers began to come on the scene. And they were able to run simulations of very complex algorithms that, with the supercomputers, that you would change one small variable in the algorithm, and it seemingly it was inconsequential. And it would, by processing, at the end, spit out different results, potential different results that were completely at odds and unthought of as what might happen. And so they've been now, of course, this is used in weather forecasting. One small variable, let's just take a little wind gust in Brazil, has a cause and effect relationship that statistically, potentially, and of course it's a very small potential, maybe even infinitesimal, but it does exist to have a very large impact. And this butterfly effect is now has been quite commonly accepted. And this man's proposition back in the 60s has been justified. And it is the basis of what's now known as chaos theory in mathematics. Now, I bring this up because the point that is being illustrated in this story is that, and it's a point that Master Paramahansa Yogananda also made, is that everything in this world is interlinked. There's an interlinking of all parts of the whole have a role to play. There's nothing too small that doesn't have some effect potentially upon everything. And think of the vastness of this universe and all of what's going on in it. It's incomprehensible, and no supercomputer, however big, could ever possibly calculate all the potentials of all of this. But the principle applies, and it's recognized that everything is related. And what happens here eventually, potentially, will work itself potentially to something else. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda and these teachings of Kriya Yoga, these teachings of yoga, takes this even a step further. It said, yes, science recognizes that all things are interrelated. But Yoganandaji said, we must remember too that thoughts too are things. They have a consciousness and a power that is surrounding them. They too influence, and we know this, we can see this happening in life. Feelings too are things. And those feelings and those thoughts, they have the potential to influence. Now you have a butterfly, but what if you have a flock of butterflies? What if you have 1,000,000 butterflies, 1,000,000 butterflies? Eventually, at some point, these things start to actually manifest statistically as likelihoods begin to increase. Well, it's the same thing with thoughts, with feelings, with little seemingly inconsequential things. And what it points to is that all of us participate on some level in what happens in this world. All of us participate in what is going to be perhaps down the road. Our thoughts matter, our feelings matter, and especially those thoughts that are supported in group thought, they begin to matter, and they have a power to them. They're not idle. They're not idle. They have consequences. And of course, if we think in terms of the law of karma, we know that this is so. Everything is interlinked in this. There's nothing outside of the large system. There's nothing outside of Divine Mother. It's all part. Now, right now, let's take this into what we're dealing with now. We're faced with a pandemic. And we've been talking about that. And if you've been tuning into the programs that we've been having, you know that we've been dealing with it from many different angles. And this is, I've been coming at it from this angle of magnetism, but there's a larger problem also at play here. This pandemic is going to play itself out over the next number of months. Some people say it might be a couple of years. I have no idea, but it will play itself out and it will have a great effect. And that effect also is going to manifest in people's reactions to it, how we as individuals react to it, the fear, the positive, the negative, how people behave. And we don't think that our reaction to it necessarily has any consequence, but it does. It does have a consequence. I was, there were reports that when Mr. Modi introduced the shutdown, that there was panic buying. People were running off to stores. Oh my God! And the shelves being cleared. You see this from other countries as well. The pictures of the grocery stores with nothing on there, and people crowding, pushing, shoving, getting angry, fighting. These things are consequences, and that consequence can be magnified and is being magnified by the degree that it is supported by people throughout the world responding in that way. And that continues and puts into motion a wave that goes out. And this is the fascinating part. Paramahansa Yogananda said, the thoughts of mankind, little do we know, but the thoughts of mankind influence what goes on in this world. From the season, from the rainfall, the thunderclouds, to the erupting of volcanoes are related. There's nothing independent, and the degree to which we behave in a certain way is going to influence. And now it may not be tomorrow, it may not be next year, but there's a consciousness that is being put out there. There's a wonderful story. This is a story of Ram, where this Swami Kriyananda used to tell this story, that Ram one day, one of his ministers came to him, one of his attendants, and said, "Oh, sir, I have something to report. I've had some bad news." And Ram says, "Yes, well, tell me." And he says, "A report has come in from a village far away on the edge of the kingdom that it has been reported that a husband and wife were arguing." Ram says, "Oh." At a little ripple of disturbance, an argument. Now, Ram's kingdom, you see, was harmony. There was harmony. And harmony was disturbed. The husband and wife had been arguing. And Ram knew at that moment that in some fashion, darkness had entered into Ayodhya. Now, isn't that interesting? And this is what I'm saying. I'm saying is that, of course, we live in a time now when lots of darkness has entered into our kingdom. But it's not that we don't play a part in that. We do. It comes, the reflection, you could say, outwardly is lots of times a reflection of human consciousness as well. And each of us play a part in that and have a responsibility for that. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda, he lived in the United States for 30 years. And of course, when he was in India, I'm sure he experienced the First World War and the pandemic in 1919. Millions died in India at that time. It was terrible. But then he went to the United States, and in the 1930s, there was a worldwide Great Depression. And Yogananda spoke often to that problem. And he said, what is the cause of this depression? Well, economists and historians, they might come up with many answers, and they have. I know many of them. I've read those books, and so have you probably. But he said, no, the cause of this depression essentially is selfishness. Human selfishness, human greed has put the vibrations into the ether to come back. Human selfishness has violated the basic laws of human prosperity. And what is selfishness? The wanting drawing something to oneself rather than offering outward to others, to sharing, to see mankind as one's brothers and sisters, but yet to get it for myself. I know, have you ever been, I'm sure you have, you live in India, so I'm sure you've been to stores where you're just about to the counter and some guy will come in from the side and elbow you out of the way and get in there. And I think, what's this fellow doing? You know, and what's he thinking? I want to get there first. I want to be first. I want to, you know, and this happens not just in India, this happens in every country to some degree. But this side of this attitude of me first, I don't, in other sense, you don't count. You're not human. You're not my brother. You're not my sister. I come first. And this psychosis, in a way, of people who think in terms of their own little needs and completely black out the needs of others causes a wave to go out into the universe for that individual's particular karma, and it begins to block and close the doors of prosperity, ultimately to come back to that person. People that are like that think only of themselves. They're never going to be truly successful. They may get a few rupees here and there, but true success is being able to see ourselves in experience and know that we're one with universal consciousness of God. We are one, and that God is being manifested all around us, and we are part of that beautiful symphony. And we don't, by selfishness, we think ourselves of the little self, and we cut ourselves off from that. And yes, so okay, that's our individual karma. But the point I'm making here is it's more than just our individual karma. When you put millions of people in selfishness, that's a lot of butterflies flapping their wings, putting out a wave of consciousness that ultimately has an influence coming back upon the world at large. Now, the average scientist would probably laugh at this idea that, oh, what you think, that's not it. Oh, it's strictly some viruses. And yes, but thoughts and consciousness manifest to find a way to manifest on the physical plane. And so in a sense, you might say they manifest as one way or another, in this case, diseases of one sort or another. And we live in a time, we live in a universe where we're in a Dwapara age where we are in a very restless time. We're not in the time of Ayodhya, and we're not in a Satya Yuga or a Treta Yuga. We're in a Dwapara Yuga. But yet, all of us, depending upon our consciousness, we choose the age of consciousness in which we want to live by what we do in our life. And so our responsibility is to bring a higher consciousness into this age and to help it evolve and to bring it up. It's our duty to do that. Now, I want to take this even a little bit further. Master lived during the time of the Great Depression, but toward the end of his lifetime, he began to speak prophetically about things that would happen in the future. And he would say, and he said this to his disciples, and Swami Kriyananda, who came to him in the last 4 years of his life, recounted it again and again. Master said, you don't know what a great cataclysm is coming. Billions, I tell you, will suffer. Now, he also said, made very specific ones about the fates of various countries in the future, wars that would come at some time. Because remember, we think we live in a higher age, perhaps in the 20th century, which was characterized by warfare. But we know warfare isn't, warfare is an expression of individual consciousness, of that competitive spirit on a national scale. Get me first, me first. My country first. Nationalism, popular nationalism, these sorts of things are cancers on the human consciousness, and we must resist them. Now, not resist them out necessarily. I'm not suggesting you go out and march in the street, because these things, you can't get your hands on them. They're diseases. just like this coronavirus is a disease that we have to resist. And the disease of selfishness is rampant. Something that has to be resisted. And so now I want to make a point here though. Master said these things would be in the future, but he also said that nothing is inevitable. Otherwise, man has free will. But unfortunately, there's also a certain statistical probability. Man could reform, but the statistical probability is maybe he's not. And ultimately, it takes hardship in order to get people to rethink their priorities. And isn't that so for the individual? Oftentimes, until we're slapped about a little bit, then we say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to reform and do something better. But a wise person doesn't let it get to that. A wise person reforms before nature or parents or whatever the instrument of nature is reforms us. And this is the situation that we are in now. It's our choice to reform, to bring out the right side, the high side, the dharmic side, and express that. And don't feel a sense that, oh, it's a destiny, there's nothing I can do about it. Well, we don't know what mass karma is, but certainly our individual destiny or the destiny of our loved ones who are Sangha, friends and family, we can be a flock of very strong butterflies, in this case, of putting out a positive vibration. And as Master said, God protects his devotees. But besides looking for my personal protection, which honestly I don't really think about much myself, but I do want to help the situation. I do want to help others. And I think as disciples, this is our duty. And I think all of us feel that impulse to do that. Now, Swami Kriyananda, I knew him for many years, many decades, meeting him in 1968. And I will say that from the very first year I met him, he would remind us of these things that Master said. He said, prepare yourself. Now he would say, and actually this was one of the reasons he started a Nanda community, a Nanda village, as a physical means of preparing a place where devotees could be, and if hard times did come, they would have a place to call their own to be safe. But he also, I think in a larger sense, was meaning we need to prepare ourselves individually to create that aura of strength around ourselves to be able to, should these hard times come, should these predictions come to pass, we at least have prepared ourselves. So in the midst of that chaotic situation or whatever's going to come, we can create a bubble of strength, a bubble of light, and ideally expand that bubble to include others as well. Master did say about India, by the way, he did say India would be protected. No country is going to be unaffected, is pretty much what he said. Everybody will be affected, but some worse than others. And he said India will be spared the worst of it because of its good karma from the past. Now, we can't take that for granted, just sit back. And as I was going to say, that Swami he warned us from the very, very earliest years, 1968, I met him, and again and again and again. And he would say, something's coming, but unfortunately, Swami never could pin it down exactly what it was. He would say that, I don't know what, something is coming. But one thing that he did always, you might say, remind us about, we're in a pandemic right now. What are the chances this pandemic is going to go on for some months? Well, probably good. That's what even the economists out in the governments are saying. It's likelihood it could go many months, perhaps come recurring. The economy of all countries are going to be disturbed in the couple of years ahead, perhaps until a vaccine comes on the scene. And economies, I suspect, in many countries will fail. There's going to be economic hardship is going to come to us. Now, some people, some countries, I suspect, will be mildly touched by that, but some countries could be severely tested by that. But whether it's much or little, I come back to this principle. We're all tied together. So nobody is going to be immune. And so it's wise for us to prepare physically, but I'm not saying going out and elbow your neighbor so you can have panic buying first in line. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying be practical. Be practical. Are you in debt? Swami used to say, don't be in debt. Try to get out of debt. Now, it's a little late right now, maybe, but to be free in that way is a great benefit. Don't be in debt. Prepare for disruption if it comes. But most important, he said, prepare mentally and spiritually. Faith is our armor. Light is our strength. Darkness is the enemy. And that enemy, it creeps in and it's going to, and it seems to be right now enveloping us. But it'll pass. It will pass, but it'll pass more quickly if those who embrace the light live that light within themselves and express that within themselves. So be practical, use common sense, and be prepared, but mentally prepare. You could say spiritually. Master said meditation is the greatest tool. Kriya Yoga meditation. It's the greatest tool to be able to create that aura of strength around yourself so that nothing can touch you. Nothing can touch you. And if that strength is strong enough, it emanates out and makes a protective aura for your family's sake, if for nothing else. It'll help to thwart the cross currents of difficulties that may be in store for us. But like I say, do it for the right purpose, not out of a sense of fear or sense of reaction, but because it's the right thing to do. Now is a time when selflessness is needed. If as Master was true, economic hard times came in the 1930s because of selfishness and greed. So what does that tell us? It tells us the antidote is to do the opposite of those. Instead of greed, share. Share with others. Share your physical with that, your material. Share your feelings. Share your love, your embrace. Share your mental embrace of them. Treat thy neighbor as thyself, because your neighbor is yourself on the deepest level, isn't it so? The Bible says this, all great scriptures say that. Don't cut yourself off emotionally and spiritually from other people. This is where we begin. But also be of service as well. We've been talking in many of the webinars that have been being given from the different centers of ways to serve. Why? Now, why is selflessness? Let's bring this back to the topic where we started, magnetism. Why is selflessness magnetic? And why is selfishness unmagnetic? You could say you dissipate your magnetism. That thinking of yourself, why does it destroy that magnetic aura around yourself? Is because you're focusing on the little self. It's the little s in selfishness. That little self is being focused on, and that littleness is embraced by the ego. I, me, mine. We come first. Get out of the way. I'm coming, and just, you don't matter, I matter. That selfish attitude, that competitiveness in the wrong way. Now, competition can have some benefits, but that's the wrong sort. You have, like Swami would often say, if you're living with 1,000 people and you're all competing as they're your enemy, wouldn't it be much nicer if you were 1,000 people and you thought of all 999 as your friends and you worked together cooperatively? So this is what the lesson's coming to us. The selflessness is to forget that little self. And in the forgetting of that little self, the barrier that keeps the divine flow from manifesting through you, it opens that gateway, that door, and you find yourself supported by God's grace, of course, But God's grace manifests by everything around you, and somehow things work out for you. And you don't have to think me first. Look at the lives of all the great ones, the great saints. They were never like that. They were giving. They thought of others. Why? Because they saw God in other people. They saw God in other people, and they saw God ultimately in themselves manifesting. There's no difference. That same light that burns within me burns within you. And this attitude is what is going to be our divine protection. But I'm saying it not just for ourselves. This is the role that we can play in this time of difficulty for our benefit, for everybody else's benefit. So keep these thoughts in mind. Now we're in the weeks and months, I hope it won't be months, but maybe it will be. We're going to be coming back to these themes, and all of it comes back to these themes of developing magnetism for our benefit, for the world's benefit, because it's pleasing to God to be that way, to be an instrument and a servant of God, and be practical and put your teachings now into practice. Now we're at that point in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where Arjuna there, and we're being tested daily. And so let's succeed as warriors of the light. Let's succeed as disciples of this great master, Paramahansa Yogananda. Joy to you. And I'm going to come back next Monday, and we're going to continue these themes at 7:30 on Monday, same time.